Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mai hara mai ki tēnei hui I porangi, ko Craig Bleckley tonga ingoa no ika poro ahu. Hi everyone and welcome back. I'm Craig Bleckley, safety and risk consultant here at EcoPortal. It's awesome to have you all with us here today. Our goal with these sessions is to help you stay informed and inspired when it comes to health, safety and risk management, whether that's in the workplace or in your communities. Today, we've got a really important topic to discuss: retail crime, the health and safety crisis in customer-facing environments. We'll be talking about not just the physical risks that come with retail crime, but also the often overlooked psychological impacts on staff and customers alike. We're really lucky to have Lisa White from BNZ here today. She's the head of protective services at BNZ, the Bank of New Zealand, and she's been working on the front lines of these issues for years. She's got extensive experience in managing safety risks for employee well-being, and she's going to share some really valuable insights with us today. Now, let's get on with the main event. I'm thrilled to introduce our expert for today's session, Lisa White, the head of protective services at BNZ. Lisa has had over 15 years of experience leading safety initiatives in high-risk sectors, including banking. She's passionate about creating safe, supportive, and inclusive work environments, and her deep expertise in protecting both employees and customers from the impacts of retail crime is invaluable. In her role at BNZ, Lisa is working at the front lines of this critical issue, developing strategies to tackle both the physical and psychological effects of crime in customer-facing roles. Lisa, it's so great to have you with us here today. Thank you for being here.
Kia ora. Thanks, Craig.
How prepared do you feel your organisation is in addressing retail crime and protecting the safety and well-being of your staff? What do you make of that, Lisa? I mean, crime has certainly been kicking off more in recent times and a lot more in the news. Does that resonate with your world and what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, it certainly resonates, Craig, to what we're seeing. So some organisations do crime prevention really well and support their employees extremely well, and others somewhat, and others haven't given it any thought. But luckily, those ones are in the minority.
So let's kick things off. Can you give me an idea about what retail crime looks like at the BNZ? And extending on that, how has that landscape changed in recent years? You know, what type of incidents are you seeing more of, especially in your customer-facing branches?
Yeah, look, if you think about what we used to face into, when I started in this role 8 years ago, our biggest risk in terms of crime was robbery. So bank robbery, whether it was a hard robbery with a weapon or what we call a soft robbery with, with a note passing. In the middle of that, somewhere you had COVID. Now that created a lot of customer aggression, and I think that's where we really saw the turning point. You fast forward through to today, and our main risk is our customer aggression. So customer aggression towards bankers, sometimes customer aggression towards customer on customer. Customer aggression is what we live and breathe. 8 years ago, we didn't have such things in our vocab that we have now. So you just think about our terminology that we have. We talk about controlled entry, branch closures, safe havens, duress pendants, those sort of things we didn't talk about sort of 8 years ago. Thinking about resourcing, when we have security managers, we now specifically recruit for customer aggression managers. So those sorts of things has changed our landscape. We've also got fraud that we deal with, customers committing fraud, but our main risk factor today is customer aggression. Robbery, not so much. Touch wood, we haven't had a robbery for coming up 7 years. That's the longest we've had no robbery. And I think the reason for that is it's considered high risk, low reward. We're often caught up in external events, with our neighbours. So ram raids, jewellery stores, fog cannons going off, fights outside the branch. But those are the sort of things we're seeing today.
Is BNZ any and are they an outlier in that robbery situation, Lisa? That are your stats around that space replicated across other key branches and key banks brands across Australia and New Zealand?
Yeah, all banks across New Zealand are seeing a downturn in robbery, which is great, and they're not the violent robberies that we've had, thankfully.
Mm,
Australia's sort of along the same trajectory. They're seeing less impact with robberies. It's just considered to be such low risk, high risk, but low reward.
mm. Yeah, awesome. Cool. So any other sets on that particular point, Lisa, that you'd like to dwell on?
Yeah, we spoke a little bit about COVID, and that was the turning point. So we've seen since COVID across the banking sector. So I sit on the NZBA Security Forum, and we discuss things openly about how we can combat increasing crime. But since COVID, we've seen, an increase of over 300%, and that's across the banking industry. And typically since COVID, we've seen offenders, non-typical offenders, and I think everyone's seen that across all industries. It's not your usual people that you would think that would be causing trouble. It's all sorts.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. Brilliant. Okay. So the scale, increase in aggression by over 300%. That's a pretty wild increase in scale, and it sounds like
Mm,
the nature of crime has shifted from being that sort of potential petty theft to something more aggressive and concerning.
yeah.
Um, that becomes a really complex issue, and I imagine it must keep you and your team on your toes every day. Have you had to increase the resourcing internally to now manage this whole brand new risk that's affected by your teams?
Yes, what we've done is we've recruited for a specific set of skills. So, customer aggression manager. So, she is there to support the frontline staff. She's looking for customer behaviour, and she's looking to manage that from the security team. It's a different world now than what we used to have with robbery. So, with customer aggression, I think the important thing to note for us is we've got to track it. So that's why we use Eco Portal, because it's a very easy way of tracking it. Someone doesn't just walk into the bank and smash up the place. It doesn't happen like that. People will have triggers, and there will be a start of the aggression. It might start with frustration, someone coming in saying, "Oh, look, I'm really fed up with the banking system." No one talks to the customer about that interaction or solves the problem. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And the customer's just trying to solve a problem, and that's what ends up in physical assaults. That's why we track every single incident. We manage every single incident within the security team. Talk to the customers, talk to the branch staff, see how they're coping, and put in techniques to build resilience and to stop that violence from happening, because that's our end goal, is to stop the physical assaults.
Can you explain the restrictions around displaying shoplifters or aggressive customers' images in staff-only areas? You might have done a post, your police report, sent it through 105 or non-emergency. But what can you do, and what do you understand around legally what you can do to displaying those images in a non-public facing space?
Yeah, what we do is we display trespass customers in the back of house. So you've got to consider the privacy restrictions that everyone needs to adhere to. But if someone's been trespassed from a premise, we need to know that their picture's being displayed so staff can feel confident if they enter the premise, we're dialing 111. So we don't deal with shoplifters, and I'm not sure about the legalities of that, but certainly when someone is trespassed, they're not allowed to enter. They're not allowed to enter the branch, and by engaging with them, you then nullify the trespass order. So it's really important that people know who the trespass person is, and then what to do and what to say to that trespass person. We can't engage with you, we're calling the police, and what your rights are.
Taking a step back, looking more holistically, a really interesting approach that BNZ has is around the values around the BNZ values around safety
Mhm.
and employee well-being, and those values drive a really big part of your approach, as I understand. Really interested right from the start of this conversation is how do you integrate those values into your daily operations, especially when you're dealing with high risk situations? And could you maybe give us a real world example of how those values guide decision making when things do get heated?
Yeah, look, what we put at the heart of all of our decisions, customer and colleague safety is our number one priority. we have zero tolerance for aggression, and like I said before, we record every single incident. So customers don't just come in and go crazy. There is something that is happening. So making sure that when someone comes in with a grievance, the security team are then managing that. So what we do is we've put a lot of emphasis on training, so the de-escalation process, and give empowerment to the branch. So they've got the ability to close the branch at any time, regardless of who's in the branch or who's not. So if they need to take people to the safe haven, they take their customers with them. So they've got total empowerment, and then they feel supported to go through that traumatic event, because with the aggression, it doesn't need to be a physical assault. It can be someone screaming at them, swearing. There could be children in the branch, but giving them the empowerment to take everyone into a safe haven. You don't need to deal with that. That's how we sort of bring our values to life.
Awesome. So I do love how BNZ takes this holistic approach, and safety is not just a priority, right? That it is embedded. It's a day-to-day operation. It's something that you don't necessarily have to think about. And so it's not about just not about responding to incidents that when they happen. It's about preventing them from happening in the first place by sticking to those values. So I think that's a really powerful way to operate. So you mentioned the increase in aggression in customer-facing environments, that 300% increase, especially since COVID. If you had to rate the severity of aggression on a scale from, say, 1 to 7 at the moment, where are you right now? And then what type of impact does this aggression have on staff morale?
Yeah, look, if I had to rate the levels of aggression, we rate every single incident. So it's really important we understand every incident and where it sits. If we get anything at the higher level, and a higher level I mean that there's a physical altercation, something getting thrown, someone being struck, we put a lot of resource into that. We use a matrix to decide the customer outcome. So if you're a first-time offender, we'll call you, you've come in, maybe you've had a really bad day and you've shouted at the bank teller for no good reason. Having a conversation, being given a written warning letter about we have zero tolerance for aggression, that's how you'll come to our attention, and we'll put a flag on your account. So when you do come in next time, the banker knows, look, probably don't discuss KiwiSaver hardship, that might be a trigger. The next time that the customer reacts badly, they will then get a call from the security team, and we'll consider trespassing or exiting and putting other measures into place. And it's important that we use the same logical matrix across the behaviour. So it's nothing to do with customer footing, how much money the customer has, the age of the customer, the sex, the race, anything like that. It's about the behaviour. So if an 80-year-old man comes in with a cane, and people will laugh at that and go, oh my goodness, what sort of harm can he cause? He can cause a lot of harm, especially when he whacks it down onto the counter, narrowly missing, a young person that's maybe this is their first role, and it can be really frightening for them. So using a matrix to decide how we're going to deal with that, and then what outcomes. So luckily, we don't see a lot of the more intense ones. Like we said, we rate them. We see a lot of the lower end aggression. So level 2, level 3, which is frustration, and it goes into the aggression. If it gets any higher than that, they won't be a customer. We're in a fortunate situation where we can choose to exit customers. We can choose to trespass them, and that's what we do.
Does it happen often? Is it a situation where you can provide a ballpark sort of stats as to over a year how often you are either trespassing or exiting a customer?
Yeah, this will give you an indication. We have a weekly exit meeting. So we have an exit meeting with the various departments of the bank because we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for our staff, but also the right thing for our customers. So we involve our vulnerability team. So they work with our at-risk customers. Some customers are in domestic violence situations. We need to know from the collection side, is there financial hardship? And then we also need to keep our branch leadership team involved. Everyone will have a view on what we do, But every week we meet and we talk about at least 3 exits. So the
Wow.
exits are certainly up there, but what we don't want to do is shift the problem around. So if we get our different departments of the bank to help work with these customers and put some parameters in there, it might not always result in an exit, but there'll be parameters. So if you're going to come into the branch, this is the way that you're going to contact us, through phone. We don't want you in our branch. We don't want you intimidating our frontline staff.
So when it comes to the aggression levels, and you're saying, hey, we don't often bounce into that 5, 6, 7 level of on your scale. Do you, and you're mainly around that 2, 3, 4, say, is it a consistent response from your staff members when it comes to their reactions and their morale in terms of when they are experiencing or facing with it? Is it quite a consistent experience, or really depending on the individual, the staff member, their experience, their age, their length of time in their role? Is it quite each situation has to be a really specific response by the bank as to how to respond to the employees' needs that face that aggression?
Yeah, it really depends, because we have some higher risk branches, and I would say those are in our main cities. We've got a lot of rural branches and they face different challenges. So the training's given to each individual, and it's all the same training, and our expectations are that if someone comes in and we can't de-escalate the situation, we then move into, and I can talk a little bit later about the 4Ds, but around the disengagement piece, that once a customer meets that threshold, whether you're in the city centre of Auckland or you're down in Gore, if the customer meets that threshold, you don't have the option. You must disengage, you must go to the safe haven, because the behaviour's met that threshold. And while we haven't had the 6 and 7 incidents, I can go through some examples about where they've been near misses, and it's to do with the staff empowerment and the leadership in the branch that have resulted in the near misses because they've kept themselves safe.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Let's talk about that now. Lisa, if you did want to talk about some of those examples that did result in a near miss, thankfully, that would be, so there we go. So we're looking at the different levels there. So thankfully you're not around the 5, 6 or 7. So where it's a threat or actual a physical assault or a serious assault, you're more around the verbal abuse, serious intimidation or property damage. Yeah, if you've got a couple of examples as to where you haven't gone into the 7, thankfully, that'd be really interesting for us.
Yeah, there's 2 examples that I can think of. So one happened recently in one of our main city centres. The customer came in extremely agitated. They pressed their duress pendant. We could see on the camera that things, he was clenching his fists, he was pacing. There's triggers that we will direct people to a safe haven, and pacing, clenched fists, and you can see him yelling. That will result in going to a safe haven. So it was a really busy branch. They probably had 15 customers, 15 customers and staff in total. While he was pacing up and down, they just quietly went to the safe haven, and when he realised there was no one in the branch, he started smashing the door with a stool. So the glass is pretty tough, so he couldn't get through it. The security team's on the phone to the police, and it resulted, luckily this was across the road from the courthouse, so there was about 10 police officers on site really quickly. But the main thing was the staff were out the back and they were safe. They knew what the threshold was. The other one was even more interesting, because this happened when we first talked about safe havens. And one of the things we spoke about with safe havens, it's the clear pathway to keeping yourself safe. And each branch has got a different layout. So sometimes the front door might be your best option. And once again, it was in another city branch. The customer was dealing with the branch manager, and the customer was getting very, very aggressive. So pacing up and down, but he was dealing with the branch manager. The branch manager made the call with the hand signal to go and leave the branch. So their safe haven wasn't behind the customer, it was going out the front of the branch. When he saw that the staff had left the branch manager then followed. So when they followed, they met down the road. That's just what they'd been trained to do. And when we reviewed the CCTV, we could see the customer like he hadn't even registered. There was no one in the branch. The police turned up. There was no staff on site. And when we did the debrief, one of the questions I said to, our colleagues in the branch was, how did you feel? You just walked out and you left him there. It's not something, a customer would think we would do. And they sort of joked about it and said, we just felt so safe. We just looked at him. We could see him through the glass down the road, and we just knew we were safe. And it sort of made light of a really bad situation, because I have no doubt this customer could have got violent.
Mm,
And when someone's enraged, research will tell you they don't have that peripheral vision. They're literally just looking at that person in front of them. So he had
mm.
no idea what had just gone on. So when someone's enraged, it's important to note that he probably won't see, or she, what's going on. So make use of that and get to your safe haven.
Interesting. The collecting customers up with you and obviously taking them
Mm,
to safe haven, are most of the customers at the time, they obviously can see and hear what's going on. Are they
mm.
normally quite pliable to be encouraged or required to follow the staff member to that safe place, whether it's exiting the building or into the safe haven? Have you ever had situations where the customer doesn't want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our training, we explain it a little bit like, the airline message, please get your own mask on before assisting others. When a customer's kicking off in branch and they're getting aggressive, everyone knows. So the banker politely says, look, we're just going to go to a safe haven. Would you like to come with me? So the customer will generally follow.
Mm,
Sometimes they don't need to say anything. But, we've also had customers saying, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm in my lunch break. You just sit here and serve me. But at the end of the day, it's your safety that matters. So you'll simply go to your safe haven. The customer will then choose to leave
yeah.
the branch or stay there. So it's about your personal safety, and we can't force people to come with us.
Mm. Really interesting. I don't want you to give away too much of your trade secrets, but your safe haven, you've talked about this quite a lot now.
Mm.
What is that? What does that look like? I think we're all interested as to how, what that actually is in the branch.
Yeah, a safe haven's defined, it's somewhere that there's a place of safety, so it's a locked door. A safe haven can only be a safe haven if the aggressor can't follow you. So that's why we give the option that your safe haven could be out the front of the
Mm,
branch. If you feel that that person's following you, you don't want to go through a locked door and end up out the back with no support. So the best place is out in the open public. So going outside the branch, and we usually say the best place to meet is where you'd normally meet for your fire drills. But
mm,
being in a crowded place will generally deter people unless they're mentally unwell and they don't have that rational brain engaged.
mm. Not really interesting. How do you get your other customers to the safe haven without letting the aggressor know? But I think you've answered that in terms of they've got tunnel vision of this is my focus and they don't actually see what's going on around them. So,
Yeah,
yeah, really interesting. Death threat is level 5, but I think we all looked at that when that's lower than physical assault. Is that because it's purely just a threat as opposed to an actual physical outcome, and thus that's why it is lower? But do you almost to a degree bundle 5, 6, 7 together, and there is a similar response to any of those three things?
absolutely. Yep. So we've got credible death threats and we've got non-credible death threats. So you have to decide initially, what is it? Is it initial is it a credible one? And if it's a credible one, we'll be phoning 111. Or is
Mm,
it someone that's just come in and said, oh, I'm just sick of you guys today. I'm going to go home and get my gun. Where there's no credible threat, because perhaps, he is elderly. Although, like I said before, we don't differentiate between someone's age, race, anything like that. But you would look at, do they have the capability and the intent to do something like that?
Talking about safe havens in retail space, I know we're going slightly off
Mm,
script here, but I think there's a lot of retailers on the line that don't have um, the ability of a bank, which is in essence a secure location
mm.
with lockable areas. What would your recommendations be, knowing of your industry connections and conversations around those retail environments that don't have either a security guard or a facility on hand? What would you suggest in those situations?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say when people mention security guards, I always say your security guard is not your number one control. So while they can be a deterrent, we've had a branch robbed in Auckland where we had a security guard and the offender just walked past them. So I think it's a myth when people say if we don't have a security guard, we're not safe. Sometimes it can be better, but it's not a number one control. Sorry, I was going a little bit off topic there, Craig. I can't remember what the that's right.
Safe
Yeah, that's
havens.
right, the room. Yeah, so anywhere that someone feels safe. So like I said, it doesn't need to be a locked room. It can be in a place of a public area. So if you need to exit the branch or the shop, in our malls, shops there, it can be a safer environment going into the food court where there's, where there's lots of people around. Barriers of delay. So in a shop, you'll have a counter. So the most important thing to remember to avoid a physical assault is keeping that distance. And that can look really natural. So you can have a counter in front of you, a bench, whatever it might be. So having a look at what your barriers of delay are. So if someone was to strike you, what's between you and that person? So it doesn't necessarily need to be a safe haven.
Yep, no, absolutely. Talking about design of the buildings, and I know over the years, branch layouts have changed very significantly from a real massive barrier. You think about the hierarchy of controls, the isolation control of ensuring there's literally no one between. There's no way from a customer to be able to access the teller. That's really the robbery components, I guess, to a lot new world these days. So I'd really love to understand how BNZ have adapted its spaces to reduce those risks, or just to take a new, fresh look at that interactions between customer and worker. And then what design changes out of all the ones you have made the most difference in minimizing those incidents?
Yeah. When we think about our robberies and we had our traditional branch tellers, and that lineup was plastic perspex screens, wires across, we made it easier for offenders to pass through a note underneath that because there was no visibility. So by making branches open plan, there's nowhere to hide. If someone is mentally well, and they've got their rational brain engaged, by having an open place, they're less likely to, to cause aggression. It certainly does happen, but by having open spaces, people can hear conversations. Um, we want to make it a good customer experience as well as safety. So we could target hard in every single branch, but it wouldn't be an inviting place for customers to come in. So how do you get that balance? So when we think about branch design, we carefully think about what the customer experience is going to be. So when you come into a BNZ branch, you'll notice that there's customer hubs and they look nice and comfy, but in actual fact, it takes you a while to get underneath the table into that seat, and that's designed that way. So when a banker puts you in there, you're in there first as a customer. If you were to jump up, it's practically impossible because you're kind of wedged in there. Our bankers are told to stay closest to the door. So that's if they do need to exit, there's no hot drinks in there. It's things like line of sight. So if you've got a clear line of sight to the door, you can see if someone's acting suspiciously, or if you've got, people having a fight outside your branch, your shop, anything like that. So having a clear line of sight and less signage on your window. So making sure that if someone is planning on doing a ram raid or a robbery or a smash and grab, they generally won't just go ahead and do it. They will scope out the place. So reporting anything suspicious, having good line of sight, having a place that looks comfortable, but if you do need to go to a safe haven or exit, you're in the best position to do that.
And any ways in terms of, I know we've discussed as well, just the management of cash and management of actually just the teller situation. That's completely changed as well, in terms of using new technology in that particular space. And that's just, again, you talk about robberies is now the lowest end, or it just doesn't happen anymore. So it's amazing that you've almost eliminated that risk based on the new technology that exists in the branches. Is there any interesting other developments worldwide in the banking space that you've seen that you'd like to implement, or is on the roadmap, or potential future developments for BNZ in the design space? Or are you pretty confident that what you've currently got is working the best?
Yeah, we're pretty comfortable. So there's been a lot of thought when we went open plan. So we went open plan, I think it was around 12 years ago. So we were one of the first to do that. Our parent bank is still looking at traditional banking design. So we're working with them around our environment because it sounds strange, right? The more open plan you are, the safer you are. But our stats, our research, everything tells us that it is the safest place. So it goes against your logical thinking, but you've got to have those other controls in place. So you've got to have the staff training. Staff are wearing duress pendants. We have CCTV. We have signage saying we have zero, tolerance for customer aggression. So having an inviting place for customers to come, but you've got to have your security controls is what works for us.
Let's talk about training, because we've mentioned it a few times now. So obviously it's super key to keeping
Yeah.
your staff prepared for those high risk situations. So what is the training regime for your BNZ staff to handle aggression or violence? Are there any specific de-escalation techniques that have worked particularly well in diffusing those situations? And what's the standard training and maybe the escalated training that you offer to your staff?
Yeah. So the first one's around de-escalation. And look, that one, to be honest, is not rocket science. If you go into any customer service facing role, that's what you're going to know how to do. We use the model called CLEAR, which is control, listen, empathize, acknowledge, resolve. If you can do all of that, you've solved the customer's problem and they'll go away happy. We have a really simple way of explaining the difference between frustration and aggression, because the first thing we always get asked is, well, how do I know if it's aggression? How do I know if it's frustration? Only you'll know that. And it's the way the customer makes you feel. That's how you'll know if it's frustration or aggression, because you will feel scared, you'll feel nervous, you'll feel anxious. Well, that's aggression because that's the way the customer's making you feel. So we'll run through that de-escalation technique, and we use a really simple way of saying, if it's frustration, treat the customer with honey. So treat them with kindness, be nice. They just want their problem solved. But if it's aggression, that's different. And you treat them with vinegar. So if it's gone from frustration, I'm trying to help you, I've listened, I've empathized, I've acknowledged, I've resolved it, I can't help you. And now the customer's moved into aggression. Now we then need to think about the 4Ds, and that is detect, uh, distance, disengage, and debrief. Detect sounds unusual because you're thinking, well, the customer's in front of you, you have detected. It's about making sure that everyone in the branch knows that there's an incident. And we have some really large branches, and especially our business, business banking hubs, they're huge. And not all aggression's loud. Someone could be leaning in and, getting quite aggressive, and it doesn't need to be loud. So we teach our staff, use a firm voice and use 2 commands. What do you want them to stop doing, and what's going to be the consequence? And do it firmly. So, please, sir, stand back. I'm going to ask you to leave. Or, please, sir, stop yelling at me, or I'm going to call my manager. Just 2 commands. We don't want to overload them with things. We want to make it really simple. So when we've detected there's an issue, we're using our voice, we're letting everyone in the branch know. So that's why we're using that loud voice, because as a colleague in the branch, you've got the choice. At that time, you're going to be thinking about disengaging, or do you go and stand next to your colleague and support them? And we leave that up to the individuals, because both things work, and it's about who feels comfortable doing what. So detecting, at the same time, when you're doing your 2 commands, you're stepping back, you've got that distance between you. We recommend 2 steps. You're thinking about disengagement, and if you have, you move to the safe haven, just like you do, in a fire drill, walk swiftly, don't run. And then really importantly, at the end, it's a debrief. So the 4Ds can happen really quickly, and we want the whole team to be working together, because when people disengage, moving to a safe haven, we don't want anyone left in the branch. So you all move or no one moves.
Yeah, interesting. How do you manage aggression against your call center staff? I'm sure you have a number of, probably the majority of your interactions every day with customers is actually over the phone, not in person. When you look at the whole volume, how and I'm sure they get a significant amount of verbal aggression. How is that managed?
Yeah, exactly the same as how we manage our, face-to-face aggression. So we have a threshold. The luxury that you've got on the phone is you can disconnect the call.
Mm,
So when it gets to that level of aggression, the customer will be warned, we're going to disconnect the call. I can no longer help you. So while they've got the luxury of disconnecting that call, they don't have the luxury of having that lesser verbal abuse. If anything on the phone, it can be worse. So you've got that repeated abuse, aggression, sometimes racial comments, sexual comments that really can take a toll on people's mental well-being. So what we do with the debrief is they have micro pauses. So after that phone call, gathering your thoughts, talking to your people leader, talking to your colleague before hopping on the call, because it's really important that we just don't go and answer the next call, because while there's no risk to physical assault, we can't downplay, the psychological damage that it can do.
and it's a perfect segue into my last really big topic. I talked a lot about the physical components, the safe havens, de-escalations when I'm in front of a customer.
Mm.
But we know that the psychological impacts of retail crime, whether it's just frustration, whether it's actually longer term, is pretty significant. So please tell me about the mental health support systems you've got in place for your staff that may have experienced aggression in the workplace.
Yeah. So with the 4Ds, the last one is that debrief. So
Mm,
that's really important. When we have a significant event, if we have to shut the branch, we shut the branch. And it goes back to that empowerment. And it's not for us to judge how significant that event is, it's how our colleagues are feeling. So if it's significant and they need to debrief right there and then, that's why we'll have the branch shut, and we'll shut for 5 or 10 minutes. We'll run a debrief. Sometimes they'll include the security team, sometimes it'll just be with their branch manager. It's really important to have great leadership in the branch, because that will often help people feel heard, because we'll have a look and see, was there something we could have prevented that interaction? Like, is there something practical we could do? So you've got the leadership in the branch, you've got the empowerment to close, or if you're in the contact centre, you've got that empowerment to have that micro pause, as we call it. We've also got our EAP partners. We've got our health, safety and wellbeing team. So if you need that specialist support, that's there. And then we've got our specialist areas. So in the bank, we've got my security managers, we've got the customer vulnerability team. They're dealing with really bad stuff all day, every day. So we're making sure that they have dedicated resources. So once a month, they will have a counselling session just on their particular role.
wow.
And we also have that, for our guards as well, because when you're in that situation, resolving these customer aggression incidents, it can take a mental toll. So making sure we're looking after the people that are looking after the people.
Good answer. Thank you. It sounds like you guys are really looking after your teams really, really well, which is obviously really super important. This is quite interesting around, obviously at a bank, you're in a very lucky position
Mm-hmm.
that you
Mm-hmm.
can trespass and you
Mm-hmm.
can accept the customer.
Mm.
Now, that's very different to a number of other public-facing environments where we're
Mm.
talking about a library, we're talking about a social agency of which
Mm.
zero tolerance, healthcare, public libraries, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, well, yes, you can always ban and trespass, but it's a lot harder to do that based on an essential service as such.
Yes.
Do you have any experience or knowledge or tips to managing aggression from repeated customers in those spaces in which there isn't the ability to long-term exit them?
Yeah, I can certainly sympathise with those customers, but you still have that ability to trespass,
Mm,
and giving them the choice of, this is how you are going to be dealing with us, and we're going to give you an option of dealing with us over the phone. I mentioned that customer vulnerability team that I deal with.
mm,
Um, Often it's not the right thing to exit the customer, but it's not the right thing for them to be coming into the branch either, because they've caused trauma to, to branch staff in there. But allowing them to do business with BNZ, but these are the channels, and giving them really strict parameters. We rely a lot on the social services, so we could be working with, whatever um, company or non-profit organisation to try and get the best outcome, because
mm.
what we can't allow is for a customer just to be coming in and displaying signs of aggression. Even if it's an essential service, our employees have a right to feel safe. So I would always advocate for trespassing and putting very clear parameters in on how this customer is going to, contact the business.
Yeah, smart approach. Keeping staff engaged in safety protocols can sometimes be quite tricky, especially for a really large organization like yourself with thousands of staff, especially when incidents aren't happening all the time. And I assume when you start a new employee, they're going to go through their standardized training, and that might be their de-escalation strategies and things. But it might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years until the first incident actually happens. How do you keep safety top of mind for your teams and those skill sets and abilities fresh and knowledgeable to them, and then keeping them vigilant over time? What's your process around that?
Yeah, we've got 101 branches, but we are 100% involved in their day-to-day activities. So we have monthly duress pendant tests. So they have to test their duress pendants.
So is that every staff member has a duress pendant?
Every staff member has a duress pendant. We have what's called a Teams chat. So we use Teams, and we have a Teams security line set up for every single branch. So the security team, we're in 101 chats. So we will often get messages through saying, could you please look at customer in the red jersey? We'll bring up the cameras. We can talk to them through the Teams message. It's an easier way than pressing the duress pendant. We find it really, really effective. We have a security notice board out the back, which is our security newsletter that goes out quarterly. It'll be a place where we store the duress pendants. It's a place where we put our trespassed customers. So when the staff are out the back having a cup of tea, they're always looking at our security notice board. And we're always doing check-ins with our heads of region, senior partners, teams training, and of course the annual training for robbery and customer aggression, that's done annually.
Interesting. So yeah, so everything you're really comfortable that it's a fresh and up-to-date knowledge for your people.
Yeah,
that's really, really good. Do you define a threat with a weapon differently than a threat, just a verbal threat? Is that
absolutely?
Is that more the physical or potential physical assault?
Absolutely, yep. So that's an immediate training that if there's a weapon being used, straight to a safe haven. I would just put a caveat on that. A robbery response and a customer aggression response are very, very different. In a robbery response, we'll be compliant. We will do everything. There would be no raised voices. You give them whatever they want. If they ask you to do a headstand, you do a headstand, because robberies can turn ugly. Customer aggression is different. We ask them to stand back, or we're going to call the police, because there's not that intention of coming in to cause harm. Generally, where robberies, we've had weapons, we've had guns, knives, all sorts of things. So quite a different response.
Selena, who's CEO of Shop Care here in New Zealand, has asked, made an interesting point here, saying, talk about the latest stats in the UK that are showing over half of the reported incidents of violence now involve a weapon, which is a bit scary. We haven't seen that spike in New Zealand quite yet, but it might just be a matter of time. Incidents in Australia are definitely increasing.
Yes.
Any thoughts about how retailers can mitigate the risk for their workers before it escalates here?
I think it goes back to those barriers of delay, or having that distance, making sure that we can keep our distance away from that person. We don't know if someone's carrying a weapon, especially if they're coming into a supermarket, anything like that. And we have had some horrendous things happen in New Zealand, but it's making sure that we keep our distance. If someone needs to run to a place of safety, knowing where that is. And if you're standing behind the cash register, where would be your place that you would run to? Where would you go and feel safe? We know that distraction will make people distract from what they're doing. So a loud noise, if you see someone with a weapon, if you're at a safe distance, yelling out to that person, making a noise, because we all know that if you're walking across the road, it could be 80 Queen Street, crossing the road, that if someone yelled out, "Hey Craig," you immediately turn. So making that sort of, you're trying to interrupt the irrational brain pattern.
Brilliant. Lisa, you've shared some amazing insights into the challenges you're facing in your strategies. Well, if a person's trespassed from a branch, are all other branches advised, or is that a breach of privacy?
Yeah, now trespass notices, you can only trespass from the place where the incident happened unless you believe that there's a threat to surrounding branches. So
Okay.
for the likes of Auckland, if something happens at 80 Queen Street, we'll likely trespass them from Newmarket and Commercial Bay, which is our close by branches. What we can't do is put a blanket trespass and say you're trespassed from all BNZ branches. That's not allowed. We would have to have a very good reason to do that, and we need to do individual trespass notices. But yes, we do advise the other branches, and that their photo goes on the back of the back of house security notice board. It's really important that they know how to identify someone going in. And often when I say we trespass customers, some of these troublemakers aren't even customers. They'll just come in and
Sure.
just cause trouble because they want to. Some will be trying to steal our iPads or do whatever. So when I talk about customers, some aren't even customers.
No, fair enough. Do you track turnover in regards to employees' feelings regarding safety? This particular person left retail due to repeated aggression incidents. After
Mhm.
10 years, they were tired of feeling like today would be the day at work that they'd be physically attacked. How do you manage this or recognize this feeling with your staff?
That's a really good question, and I think that's probably an HR question, and I know they conduct exit interviews. I would hope that if that was a theme coming through, that we would be having a conversation. To date, it hasn't, but that's a really good question. I'm going to go back and talk to the HR team to see if we track that and what we're doing with that information.
Interesting. What has been the process like to get where you are now in terms of the changes you've made? A lot of these changes to protocols, especially the de-escalations or the moving to safe havens as opposed to engaging. Was there any resistance to making the changes that you've made over the 8 years in your current role? And did you engage with internal staff or get external advice before you made these changes?
Yeah, look, there was a lot of resistance. And the resistance came from outside the bank, it came from inside the bank. Um, I recruit for diversity, so diversity of thought. I'm not an ex-police, I'm an ex-banker. Generally, people in these type of roles are ex-police, and there's a certain way of thinking and a certain way of acting. So we're really focused on challenging the status quo. So how we got to this was going, this part's broken, what can we do to fix this? And we're going to do things differently. So I think we're the only bank out there now that has a customer aggression manager. She's got a very specific background, and it's in behavioural science. She worked for police, corrections, secret intelligence service, because I'm looking for someone that can pick up something through CCTV and make an instant judgment call. So we'll recruit for specific skills, but also not accepting just because we've done something like that, it's the way that it should be done. And we've come a really long way with the stakeholder engagement, because it's about making sure that our stakeholders, which is primarily retail, they feel that they're supported, they feel that they're safe, and we've got the right expertise on board, so we just don't make snap decisions.
Awesome. Cool. Probably got time for one more question. Security guards are interesting. So
Mm,
a lot of retail environments. I know in supermarkets in New Zealand at the moment, there's a lot of
mm,
questions around the abilities of what a security guard can actually do manhandling wise.
mm,
I'm
mm,
assuming you have very similar situations where, obviously in New Zealand in particular, security guard is not legally able to lay hands on unless there's a distinct interaction already in terms of self-defense. That applies, of course, to your staff members, I'm assuming as well. There's a lot of training around that. It's pure de-escalation. It's not around actual interaction and or
mhm.
physical interactions.
Yeah. Security guards, we've insourced our security guards. So when I said they're not our number one control, it sounds like an oxymoron, because I've insourced security guards. Now, the reason I insourced our own security guards is because just because someone's in a security guard uniform doesn't mean they have the right skills to do something. When I mentioned that robbery that happened in one of our Auckland branches, he didn't look interested, he was looking down. The offender just took one look at him and thought, I'll just push him out the way, he's not interested. So having the right people being our security guards is so important. So they're part of BNZ. They look like BNZ, they have security written on there, and they are there to manage a security incident. So they've got no more powers than the banker, the teller, but what they can do is manage that incident. So when we have what we call our high risk risk branches. We know which ones they are. When something's happening, they will direct customers and staff to a safe haven. They'll be calling the police. They will be doing things that we would want our security guards to do. And that's why it's really important, because it's a critical role, that they feel that they're part of the organisation and they are, part of our BNZ team. So that's why we've insourced them. So they certainly have their part to play, as long as, everyone knows what they're there to do. And it's a false myth to say if you have a security guard, you're going to be safe. It's about the calibre of your security guard.
That's brilliant insight, and it's a really, really fascinating way of looking at it, because I know there is frustration out there by the public going, why isn't that security guard getting hands-on, getting involved and actually doing that, when we all know that they legally not allowed to, but their presence at least should be value of some description, and often that's not the case. So
yes,
it's a really interesting angle as to how you're approaching that. Lisa, thank you very, very much. Just to quickly let you know what's going on next time before we say our goodbyes. This is about proactive risk management and data-driven insights for the WHS teams, but in particular looking at the value of the ICAM risk investigation methodology. And so Daniel Stone from ICAM Australia will be joining us, and that'll be a really fascinating way to look at the best practice ways of that incident investigation methodology. Lisa, thank you so much for an incredibly insightful session today, and thank you for everyone who's joined us. But Lisa, it's been absolutely wonderful having your insight, your experience, your knowledge. I hope you've enjoyed the last hour or so, and I think we've all learned a lot around what best practice and good looks like. Thanks, Craig. I've really enjoyed it. Awesome. Stay safe and harera. Thank you for listening to safetyCast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues, because safety knowledge is meant to be shared. Stay safe, stay engaged, and be sure to catch our next episode for more expert insights. See you then.